Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. This is your daily audio stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Daily Audio Stash is where responsible marijuana smokers listen in on the latest news about cannabis, hear the voices of the marijuana law reform movement in special segments and interviews, and kick back with comedy and music no other podcast can offer. It's NORML's Daily Audio Stash. More information at normalaudiostash.com.
From Washington, D.C., the belly of the anti-marijuana beast. Season's greetings from NORML staff and the board of directors. To you and yours. This is Alan St. Pierre, Executive Director of NORML and the NORML Foundation. And I sincerely hope your holidays are both safe and hemp-filled.
Hi, this is NORML founder and legal counsel Keith Stropp, wishing you a happy holiday from NORML. Let's use this time with family and friends to rededicate ourselves to ending marijuana prohibition and stopping the arrest of responsible marijuana smokers. Happy holidays.
Welcome back to the Audio Stash. Today, I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Take a moment to join us at NORML to end marijuana prohibition in America. Just visit NORML.org. One of the biggest marijuana reform stories of 2006 was the SAFER campaign for a statewide ballot initiative in Colorado. Here on the Audio Stash, we followed the events almost as they happened, with the key players from SAFER Alternative for Enjoyable Recreation, Mason Tvert and Steve Fox. While the initiative in Colorado, Amendment 44, did not pass this year, it did garner over 40% approval and well over 500,000 votes statewide. Here on the Audio Stash, with help from FreeColorado.com, we heard the public showdown between Governor Bill Owens and SAFER supporters that happened on the steps of the Capitol building in Denver. That event followed a support rally the night before that featured some of the most dynamic voices of marijuana law reform. Yesterday, we aired Geraldine Merritt, the creator of the TalkLeft.com blog and a NORML Legal Committee member, with her talk at the event. Today, we'll hear from NORML's Executive Director, Alan St. Pierre, and the former police chief of Seattle and speaker for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, Norm Stamper. You can hear the complete coverage of all the ballot initiatives this year, the activists who made them happen, and exclusive audio from the Denver Marijuana Showdown in the NORML Audio Stash archive. Just click on the links we have on the Audio Stash homepage at normalaudiostash.com. First up today is NORML Executive Director Alan St. Pierre, addressing the racial reality of prohibition in the state of Colorado during his talk to SAFER supporters in Denver this October.
And that is, unfortunately, in Colorado, the disparity of African Americans being arrested on marijuana charges is very high, a 4-to-1 ratio. Now, it's not because African Americans use marijuana at higher percentages than whites. It's because, and this is maybe something that Norman will speak about, is that through the subjective lens that law enforcement every officer has to use at every moment that they're on patrol, is who are they going to ask, whose pockets are they going to search, whose trunks are they going to open. And so it's not outright racism, but the effect has absolutely turned out that way. It was never intended to turn out like this, but as George alluded to, the effects of our war on some drugs is racism. And it's well borne out right here in the data in Colorado regarding both arrests and sales for African Americans. There's another one, I think, that talks a little bit more about some data here. And, well, this was pretty consistent across the United States, and that is 75% of citizens arrested in Colorado are 30 years or younger. So the racial profiling, if you will, is not really racial. In fact, and I'll show a chart in a moment here, the most important criteria to determine whether you will be targeted or your pockets will be searched compared to another person's is if you're a male and you're under 30 years old. Those are the two criteria that, in essence, police will employ to figure out who they're going to be a little more scrutinous with. And 55% of citizens arrested for possession are males, under 24. Again, males drive this a lot. Again, you've got some marijuana arrests versus drug arrests. So marijuana arrests, as a percentage of all drug arrests, is 56%. 56% of all drug arrests in the state of Colorado are marijuana, not methamphetamines, not opiates, not OxyContin, not PCP. It's cannabis, and this is consistent across the country. Taxpayers, about $100 million. Not a huge amount of money in most states, but certainly enough to catch most people's attention. And the state is ranked middle, again, for cultivation. You got to do better. Got to do better. And there were almost 14,000 marijuana plants eradicated in the state. So there's some data. So you want to throw up if you live in the state, then find your county. This is too complicated, but we'll just leave this up here, and well, it won't fit all together. But that is a 5-year breakdown based on arrests and arrest rates, and we went through, and this is all on NORML's webpage. All of it's on NORML's webpage. So what one can do is kind of strategically sort of geospatially map in your head where you may or may not want to be at any particular time with anything particular on your body. But this kind of data is crucial if you're going to be a cannabis consumer in prohibition-related America. Okay, extreme difference between marijuana and alcohol prohibition. Alcohol prohibition took 100+ years to come about, mainly through the women's Christian temperance movement, making pretty logical arguments that alcohol is very harmful and can ruin families, et cetera, et cetera. And it took 100 years. So how did it come about? George described aptly I describe a legislative fiat. Yes, there were subcommittee hearings, and we can't even read them with a straight face. They're so funny. But the debate on the floor of Congress, 1 minute and 6 seconds. 1 minute and 6 seconds to create this marijuana prohibition. How did alcohol prohibition come about? An amendment to the Constitution of the United States. It's the highest hurdle set up by the Founding Fathers. So the Congress passes it. The president signs it. It's a supermajority. It goes to the states. The states approve it, and it becomes the law. And it becomes known as the great failed social experiment, which we don't have to go into detail of, other than to recognize that it was a joke. It didn't work. It was an abject failure. And it only lasted about 10 years. But it was a piece of cake compared to marijuana prohibition. I'd be happy to live under marijuana prohibition if it looked like alcohol prohibition. Why? You could possess alcohol. You could give away alcohol for no remuneration. You certainly could use it as a religious sacrament. And in one of my PowerPoint lectures, I've got all these prescriptions. You could have alcohol prescribed to you. It was 2 cases a week or 5 gallons of wine per week. You would have a prescription during alcohol prohibition. And yet in this country, as George alluded to, rightly, this federal government has brought it down to 6 lowly people that legally 100% use marijuana. So the prohibition is so different. You cannot possess marijuana in the United States. You certainly cannot cultivate it and give it to a friend. You can't use it as a religious sacrament. And since we've got a little time here tonight, let me just put that into some context for you. The Supreme Court in the early 90s, in a case called Church of Babalu, it's out of Hialeah, Florida. It's a case essentially, and this This Supreme Court, more or less, it's today, is the same one that ruled on this all those years ago, so it was a fairly conservative court. What did they rule? It was a case where it's a 2,000-year-old African religion that comes over from the eastern part of Africa, comes through the slave trade. It's as old as Christianity, well historical. So what happens? A group of Haitians who were practicing it move into essentially an all-white cul-de-sac in Hialeah, Florida, and people start thinking, what's going on in there? And one of the things that was going on was, and they rightly heard about, was that when the young men started to show puberty, they bring in a goat live, and they cut the goat wide open, and they take the young boy and they wrap the young boy up in the guts of a dead goat. Okay, I was an altar boy. I prepared the sacramental wine. And the First Amendment is the most sacred of our amendments, obviously. And the court ruled 9-0. 9-0 that is a protected religious freedom in the United States, wrapping up your young kid in dead guts. Because it's such a precious thing in this country, even if you don't agree with it, even if you think that's a little crazy. And in a former life, my real love in school, when I was in school, was regional planning and zoning. And one of the oldest zoning law is no slaughterhouses in the neighborhood, let alone like in your little cul-de-sac in Florida. And so here you had a classic, one of the best examples I've seen in the Supreme Court of a balancing act between the First Amendment and the right to wrap up the little kid in the guts against something like, should we have slaughterhouses in neighborhoods? And they ruled 9-0 in favor of religion in this country. Yet, a Rastafarian or a Zion Coptic who uses marijuana, when they send their prayers heavenly, they believe their prayers are carried wafting on marijuana smoke. So if you can wrap up a kid in the guts of a dead goat, maybe it's just me, but I think that a Rastafarian or some other legitimate religion should be able to use cannabis as a sacrament. So alcohol prohibition is so much better than marijuana prohibition, let alone the fact we have mandatory minimum sentencing. Many of you, I don't care how smart you are, I don't care if you can write the best line code in the world, if you're the best, most civic-minded person, if your excrement, your pee, when chemically analyzed, does not meet the government or the corporation snuff, then this education and what you are as a person is completely diminished. It's unbelievable, the psychopharmacological McCarthyism that marijuana has become, marijuana prohibition has become. How's that for your 25-cent word of the night? Okay, well, the next slide here, Microsoft has nothing to fear from NORML or me. No, it's not my sex life. At 40 years old, this is the representation. It's so specific, you can see the vector points, that this represents tobacco use in my lifetime. We've cut it in half. It is, by most definitions, the most dangerous and addictive substance humans interface with, more so than opiates, more so than methamphetamines. It certainly kills more people per year, just merely 400,000 of our brothers and sisters per annum, just in this country. And so how did we do this? How did we reduce smoking by half? We didn't build any super prisons outside of Denver. We didn't take people's pee and analyze it. We didn't take children away from mothers. We didn't deny student loans. We didn't racially profile. How did we achieve this laudable goal? We didn't use the criminal justice system. We used responsible, verifiable, and credible public health information. And yet we use certain techniques like ostracization. If you smoke tobacco today, where do you find yourself? Okay, you're standing outside. Maybe tobacco will be illegal someday. I certainly hope not, but I want that number to go down. I don't smoke tobacco. Most people in my life that I love and care about don't. And I congratulate anybody who tells me that they're stopped or that they want to do that. because this is something we want to see go down. But we would never see this happen under prohibition. So, that is crucial in this thinking. And as detailed and complicated as drug policy reform can be, you know the answers. Almost every one about what a functional system would look like. You don't think you know the answers. You know some of them. So our next slide here, I hope, drives it home absolutely succinctly. There is no difference in the world between a bartender and a drug dealer. A bartender delivers to you a drug of your choice. Taste it. I don't taste any of the alcohol in it. And yes, this juxtaposition, it's clear. One is legal, one is not. One is stationary, one is mobile, one is incorporated. You can serve it papers today, tomorrow, the next day. The other's unincorporated. You're chasing them around. One's got an owner. You can find him or her anytime. The other one, of course, no responsibility. One's part of the Chamber of Commerce. The other, of course not. You've got things like liability, no liability, insurance, alcohol beverage control, zoning, oh my God. I mean, zoning, in my view, is the most powerful and benign tool we have, because zoning acknowledges that there are behaviors some of us don't want. You know, like maybe a strip club or a liquor store or an arcade or a shooting gallery or something like that. You don't want it near you. But we acknowledge that these are behaviors. And so what we do through zoning is we cluster them and we put them in our master plans, and we acknowledge that these behaviors happen, and we segregate them from from people we don't want. Like, we don't give liquor licenses from across the street from the synagogue or from the children's daycare center. It's logical stuff, and all of it is borne out right here. One's taxed at 4 levels. 4 levels of taxation and control. So when you open up that pack of booze, in most jurisdictions, you have to break the tax stamp. When you get into that pack of cigarettes, what's on it? A tax stamp from the government. That is control. Marijuana prohibition is the complete rejection of a policy. Regulation of potency and purity, wholesale distribution, age restrictions, obviously, bouncers. I mean, just think about what a bouncer does. What does a bouncer do? Okay, they check your ID, and in today's world, a lot of sophisticated equipment to make sure it's okay. And what happens? If you are a disruptive drug user from all the other drug users, they come over, they remove you from the other drug users who are having a good time, and they show you the alleyway, usually a little roughly. And so, here it is. It's really that simple.
That was Alan St. Pierre, the extremely hard-working executive director of the NORML Foundation in Washington, D.C. Alan was addressing SAFER supporters rallying around Amendment 44 this October. Next today from that same event is former Seattle Police Chief Norm Stamper. Norm has a book called Breaking Rank and is one of the most active speakers for the group Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. We have links to Leap and Norm's book at normalaudiostash.com. Also, check our homepage where you can hear the complete speeches from Norm, Geraldine Merritt, Alan St. Pierre, Mason Tvert, and George Robacher. Now here's former Seattle Police Chief Norm Stamper.
Thanks very much, George. I hope my voice holds up. In fact, I'll make sure that it does. Jerry, I just want to thank you so much for your drawing that contrast between what police are doing and what police could be doing. My number one passion in law enforcement over the course of most of the 34 years that I was in that business was directed at domestic violence. A passion for prevention of violence between and among people who purport to love one another, and accountability for those who do in fact engage in violent crimes against people they purport to love. This was really driven home for me when as a rookie cop, I arrested a 19-year-old young man for being in the possession of marijuana. I remember the call. A neighbor had reported the smell, that characteristic smell of burning green vegetable matter or whatever we called it in those days, and I kicked in the door to his home. Did so on the strength of probable cause. It was a felony for him to be in the possession. I was certainly not an expert. I did pick up the scent. That was all that was required. And scooped out a handful of wet marijuana from his toilet, which he had tried unsuccessfully to flush, hooked him up, put him in the backseat of my police car, and drove him to jail. On the way to jail, he's sitting in the backseat of my caged police car, patrol car, saying, "Oh, wow, man, look at this cage." And then asking me if I might have any Fritos or Cheetos or what have you. And that was my first aha moment. This was 4 years before the drug war was declared by Richard Nixon. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I might be doing other than what I was doing. I might have, for example, been able to save a woman from injury in her home, if not death, a child from abuse. I might have been able to stop an auto thief, a car prowler, a rapist, a stick-up man. I could have been doing, in short, real police work. But here I was instead arresting this kid for doing something that I knew then was harmless, knew it intuitively. Have since come to realize through the research, much of which has been shared with you this evening, that we are talking about a harmless substance. And like any other substance, one that can be abused, one that can be for some people a problem, but which for the overwhelming majority of those over 100 million Americans who have tried marijuana at least once is not a problem and has never been a problem. And as I was listening to the speakers, I was struck by this. I was struck by what if. What if back in 1970, Richard Nixon had not labeled drugs public enemy number one? What if he had not declared war on drugs? Skeptics among many of us would say that that was not a declaration of war on drugs, but a declaration of war against people. Overwhelmingly, wildly, disproportionately, young people, poor people, and people of color. But what if he had not made that famous declaration? What if he knew, and I presume that he did not, that prior to 1914, when drugs were legal in this country, the addict population numbered about 1.3% of all Americans? What if he knew when he made that declaration some 56 years later that 1.3% of the population was addicted to drugs? What if he had a crystal ball and could foretell that in 2006, roughly 1.3% of us are addicted to illicit drugs? What if he fully comprehended the devastation produced by alcohol prohibition through the Volstead Act from 1920 to 1933? What if he really got that? What if he understood that prohibition created a criminal underclass in this country? It invented Al Capone, for God's sakes. It gave rise to unprecedented levels of violence. Traffickers, if you will, armed to the teeth, blowing one another away, killing innocent bystanders who get caught up in the crossfire. What if you'd really stopped to contemplate the effects of a bad batch of bathtub gin that killed a whole bunch of people in this country? Well, we were foolish to pass the Volstead Act through constitutional amendment, but we wised up to our foolishness and some 13 years later ended it. And yet drug prohibition has now been going on for how many decades in this country? I want to go back to Nixon's declaration of war in 1970. As I said, I was a cop for 4 years before this declaration of war and before all of that federal money started gushing out of Washington, D.C. and into local jurisdictions to wage this war. We made narcotics arrests, and as Alan's slide shows so clearly with respect to marijuana, that the number of arrests were a relative handful then. Today, we are arresting shameful numbers of people not for nonviolent drug offenses, for the possession, for example, of marijuana. We in LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, are convinced that the drug war has done far more harm than good. The effect on the Treasury at the federal, state, and local level is just extraordinary. $1 trillion has been spent waging this unwinnable war, this immoral war, since 1970. LEAP is of the opinion, based on our research, that captures the total cost of this drug war, that we continue to pump $69 billion a year down that rat hole, year in and year out. The drug war has caused more harm than good, far more. So we're of the opinion, and incidentally, just to clarify, we were up over 6,000 members now. When this organization was formed by a handful of 4 or 5 police officers sitting around a saloon probably after some drug conference, partaking of their drug of choice, each of them comparing notes and saying, this is madness. This is absolute madness. Each one of the 5 of them, including our current executive director, Jack Cole, 26-year veteran of the New Jersey State Police, 14 years of undercover narcotics work, deep undercover narcotics work, befriending people on college and university campuses, and ultimately arresting them. So there were 5 people in 2002. When I joined this organization in 2005, we were up to 3,000, and today we are now over 6,000. We are police officers, past and present. We are probation and parole officers. We are prison wardens. We are judges, including sitting judges. We are all of the criminal justice community who each has come to his or her own conclusion that the drug war is madness and that there is a better alternative. For us, it is end the drug war now, end prohibition now, replace prohibition with a public health as opposed to a criminal model. A public health, civil liberties, medical model. Let's appreciate the fact that the body you occupy now belongs to you and no one else. It's the closest thing that I have to sovereignty in my life, is what you're staring at right now. This is my body. It belongs to me. It does not belong to the government. The government has no right to tell me what to put into this body. If under the influence of anything I put into this body, including clearly the most pernicious of all drugs, alcohol, I do something I ought not to do, or fail to do something I should do that represents criminality, then by all means, please, speaking as an ex-cop, hold me responsible for that. Make me pay a fitting but fair and yet painful price for driving under the influence of any intoxicant, for furnishing any drug, including alcohol, to a child, or for the commission of any other crime. So that's where we're coming from in LEAP. We get asked often, well, what's your model for regulation? What would it look like? And we do support, incidentally, to a member, taxation, regulation, and control. That's our agenda. There's so many different possible models out there. Purely public, purely private, public-private, so on and so forth. I think I'll reserve for your questions if you have an interest in that and what my personal model would look like. But I think it's most important to talk about ending the drug war now, ending prohibition now, and replacing a criminal system that has resulted in the better part of 2.2 million Americans being in jail today.
That was former Seattle Police Chief Norm Stamper. Norm has a book out called Breaking Rank and is one of the most active speakers for law enforcement against prohibition. We have links to Leap and Norm's book at normalaudiostash.com. And make sure to check our homepage where we have links where you can hear all of the complete audio from the Denver event. This has been NORML's Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Thanks to Podshow.com for all the great pod-safe music. We feature the band Carne Cruda as our theme. Make sure you visit our website at normalaudiostash.com. That's NORMLAUDIOSTASH.com for more information about every day's show. Thanks to Red Aphid Interactive Media for the podcasting technology. We're back at 4:20 tomorrow. If you listen to the Audio Stash, cast your vote at Podcast Alley or other podcast directory services. I'm your host, Chris Goldstein. Thanks for listening today. See you at 4:20 tomorrow. The podcasting technology of NORML is made possible by Red Aphid Interactive Media. More information at redaphid.com.